So this is my lecture on poetry, particularly the poetry of William Blake, John Keats, and Emily Dickinson. In part one, I'll be focusing on Blake and Keats. So let's start with William Blake. His poetry is found on page 9 of our poetry anthology. William Blake lived between 1757 and 1827. He was born in London. He had no formal education. He was apprenticed and made his living as an engraver and printmaker. He was not only a poet, but also a visual artist. Most of his poems were accompanied by illustrations. He etched his poems and their surrounding pictorial designs on copper plates and self-published his works. One of his greatest works, titled Songs of Innocence, appeared in 1789. A follow-up collection entitled Songs of Experience was self-published in 1794. Each poem in Songs of Innocence has a matching poem in Songs of Experience. So what I want to do now is look at two of those matching poems. One from Songs of Innocence, the other from Songs of Experience. We'll start with the poem from Songs of Innocence, and that poem is The Lamb, found on page 9 of our poetry anthology. The Lamb consists of two 10-line stanzas of rhyming couplets. So the rhyme scheme is A, A, B, B, C, C, and so on. Stanza number 1 of The Lamb asks a question. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee, gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead, over the meadow? Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright, gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales, all the valleys rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? So the speaker in the poem puts a question to the lamb. The lamb is imagined as being able to hear the speaker, and the valleys are imagined as being able to hear the lamb. Nature rejoices, that is, nature feels great joy at the sound of the lamb's tender voice. Stanza number 2 of the poem answers the question posed in stanza number 1. Read along with me. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. So the phrase little lamb turns out to be an allusion. We've talked about allusions before. Literary allusions are passing references within a literary text to another well-known text. Most allusions serve to illustrate and clarify a subject. Here, Blake alludes to the Bible. It's what is called a biblical allusion. Specifically, he is alluding to the Gospel according to John, chapter 1, verse 29, with the very famous quotation, "Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away sin of the world," referring to Jesus. So Christ, in this passage of the Bible, is described metaphorically as a lamb. Christ was also a little child, the Christ child. Thus, the speaker in this poem, who is identified here in stanza 2 as a child, and the lamb that the speaker is addressing, are united in God. And thus it is very fitting that this poem ends with a blessing in which the child, the speaker of the poem, blesses the little lamb. Little lamb, God bless thee. Well, that's the Lamb from the Songs of Innocence. The matching poem in Songs of Experience is the poem titled The Tiger. And the tiger is found on page 10 of our poetry anthology. So let's turn to page 10 right now. The Tiger is a longer poem. The Tiger consists not of 2 stanzas, but 6 stanzas. And the rhyme scheme in each of those stanzas is A, B, B. Looking at stanza number 1, bright rhymes with night. I rhymes with symmetry. It would have been a closer rhyme back in Blake's day. In stanza 2, skies and eyes rhyme, as do aspire and fire. A, B, B is the rhyme scheme of Blake's poem, The Tiger. A poem that consists of 6 stanzas. So let me read all 6 of those stanzas for you now. Read along with me. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Blake's The Tiger, written in 1794. I want to go through this poem, this very brilliant poem, stanza by stanza, starting with stanza number 1. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? So this word frame in the context of this poem means create. So Blake is asking the same question of the tiger that was asked of the lamb. Who created you? That's what he's asking the tiger. Who created you? And he uses this wonderfully poetic phrase, fearful symmetry, to describe the tiger. The tiger is ferocious. It inspires fear. It is fearful. But the tiger also has a kind of beauty to it. A beauty in the symmetrical stripes on its coat. Thus, the tiger is summed up in this oxymoronic phrase, fearful symmetry. Well, stanza 2 asks, where did the creation of the tiger happen? In what distant deeps or skies burnt, meaning ignited, the fire of the tiger's eyes? Where was the fire in the eyes of the tiger first lit? The fire that gave it life. That's the question that is being asked here. And the stanza continues. On what wings dare he aspire? Aspire means to have ambition. What the hand dare seize the fire? The he here is the creator of the tiger. The wings are presumably those of an angel. The phrase seize the fire is another allusion. Not a biblical allusion, but this time what is called a classical allusion. In Greek mythology, ancient Greek mythology, Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to humankind, which made possible civilization. In some versions of the myth, Prometheus is the creator of humankind. And so Blake brings all of that mythology into his poem with that phrase, seize the fire. Blake is a master of using literary allusion. Stanza number 3 of the poem asks how the tiger was created, and what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart. And when thy heart, the tiger's heart, began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? So line 12 of this poem is confusing. I think we're meant to interpret it this way. The hand is that of the creator, the feet that of the tiger. Notice the repetition of one particular adjective, the adjective dread. He seems to be saying through the repetition of this adjective, both creator and creation are frightening and awe-inspiring. Stanza number 4 asks about the tools that were used to create the tiger. What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? The creation of the tiger is imagined as taking place in a smithy. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. The creator is metaphorically a blacksmith wielding a hammer, a chain, and an anvil. A smithy, this dark, hot place, right? The place where this frightful creature that is also in its own way beautiful, was originally created. Blake uses the verb dare. Line 14, dare its deadly terrors clasp. Who would dare wield the hammer that was used to create the tiger? In other words, the creation of the tiger was an audacious, terror-inducing act. Stanza 5 of Blake's poem begins with another biblical allusion. I think stanza 5 is my favorite stanza in this entire work, and it reads as follows. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears. The stars, as our note tells us, the stars are the angels. The angels led by Lucifer, who rebelled against God. Lucifer, morning star, the angel, would become Satan, the devil. The stars, the angels, threw down their spears when God defeated them, and they wept. They wept when they were condemned forever to hell, when they became fallen angels. Line 19 asks, did he smile his work to see? And this too is a biblical allusion, recalling the passage from the very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 31. God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. So here Blake seems to be asking, did God think it was good when his creations, Lucifer and the fallen angels, rebelled? The stanza ends with the key question of the entire poem. Did he who made the lamb make thee? Again, he's addressing the tiger. He's asking, could the creator of the harmless, warm, and cuddly lamb have also created the ferocious and predatory tiger. Is the immortal creator, who would call him God or simply the creator, any number of names, is the immortal creator responsible for the terrible as well as the tender things that are to be found in the world? It is a question that, put in a variety of different ways, challenges the faith of believers, regardless of which religion that you believe in. And so this, in many ways, is a work of philosophy. It addresses the questions that philosophers have been asking for centuries. And he does it in a six stanza poem that ostensibly, superficially, is about a tiger. The poem, unlike the lamb, has no answers to the questions it asks. The final stanza of Blake's poem repeats stanza number 1, but with one difference. Read along with me. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? The verb dare replaces the word could. Blake is asking, who would dare create something as fierce and as frightening as the tiger? Is it the same being that created the lamb? Again, he is posing a philosophical question, a philosophical question for which, at this point, he has no answer. Blake, in other words, through songs of innocence, songs of experience, and so many of the poetry collections that followed over his long career as poet and illustrator, broadened the scope of the possible topics for poetry. He didn't write, at least he didn't write very often, about love, one of the main subjects of poems. He instead tackled these larger philosophical issues as well as many political issues, and he did so using these concrete images such as the lamb and the tiger. Well, the tiger is without a doubt Blake's most famous poem, his most memorable poem. And part of what makes the tiger such an unforgettable poem are the poetic devices that he uses throughout. One poetic device is alliteration. We've looked at alliteration before in works by Wordsworth, by Shakespeare, and by Bob Dylan. We see alliteration in this poem in its very first line. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. He alliterates the T sound as well as the B sound, creating an opening line that is almost impossible to forget. Another important feature of this poem is its meter. I talked about meter in connection with Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. Poetic meter refers to the regularly recurring sound patterns in a poem. And when we took up Sonnet 18, I looked at a number of different types of meter. Well, the dominant type of meter in English poetry is the iamb. The poetic foot known as the iamb, where we have an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. The vast majority of English poems are iambic. Blake takes another route with his poem, The Tiger. Instead of using the poetic foot known as the iamb, Blake uses its opposite, the trochee. He creates a trochaic poem. Remember, the trochee is the poetic foot in which a stressed syllable is followed by an unstressed syllable. Let's just look at the first two lines of this poem, focusing in on their meter. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. So the first foot, tiger, in that first foot, it's the first syllable that is stressed. It's a trochee. Likewise, in the second foot of the poem, tiger. Again, the first syllable is stressed. In burning, it's the first syllable, another trochee, stressed syllable, followed by an unstressed syllable. And then we have a final stressed syllable to complete the line, the word bright. It's half a foot. It's the same case in line number 2, and you'll find this repeated throughout the entire poem. In line number 2, in the poetic foot, in the receives the stress. In the second foot of the line, forest, it's the first syllable of that word that is stressed. In the pairing of words of the, it's the word of that receives the stress. And again, the line ends with a single stressed word, night, half of a poetic foot. So what we have here is a trochaic poem because it's made of trochees, stressed syllable followed by unstressed syllable. And it is trochaic tetrameter because it consists of 4 feet per line, although in this case, it's a special type of tetrameter. It's tetrameter catalectic. It's a tetrameter line that lacks the final unstressed syllable. 3.5 feet means tetrameter catalectic. Why did he choose to use trochaic meter as opposed to iambic meter? I think this was done by design. The trochaic meter gives the poem a falling instead of a rising rhythm. And that rhythm, that falling rhythm, reinforces, I think, the sense of dread that is conveyed in the poem through its content and through its images and through its metaphors. So Blake found the precise form of meter that would reinforce and would fit the subject matter that he is writing about. Trochaic meter, the tiger. So we'll leave Blake, and I hope you check out some of the other poems by Blake in the poetry anthology. I've also included the poem London, which is an absolute masterpiece. It's found in Songs of Experience, Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, landmarks in the history of poetry. That this engraver, this illustrator with no formal education, who didn't even take his work to a publisher, he self-published his works, would create these 2 poetry collections that complement one another, that would stand the test of time, continue to be read, continue to be celebrated over the centuries. William Blake, one of the all-time greatest poets. As is the next poet I want to look at. He's found on page 14 of our poetry anthology, and that is John Keats. John Keats was born in London in 1795. His father, who ran a horse stable, died when John was just 8 years old. John's mother died of tuberculosis when he was 14. In 1815, when John was 20 years old, he became a medical student in London. He eventually abandoned medicine for poetry. Between ages 23 and 24, Keats wrote most of his best poems. After years of illness, he died of tuberculosis at the age of 25 in 1821. His greatest poem, at least in my opinion, is also one of my favorite poems, and that is Ode on a Grecian Urn. What is an ode? An ode is a long lyric poem with an elaborate stanzaic structure. The ancient Greek poet Pindar wrote poems that praise athletes, the athletes of the original Olympic Games. So the ode began as a poetic genre, as a very much a public form of poetry, celebrating the achievements of celebrities, notable people. Well, the 19th century poets such as our friend William Wordsworth, as well as John Keats, they wrote what are called personal odes. In a personal ode, an element of the outer scene leads the poet to reflect on his or her problems. And that's what Ode on a Grecian Urn is, a personal ode. It was written in 1819. It consists of 5 10-line stanzas. The rhyme scheme for Keats's ode is a very complex one. Each stanza begins with an A, B, A, B, C, D, E rhyme. In the final 3 lines of each stanza, the C, D, and E rhymes are repeated, but the order of those rhymes varies from stanza to stanza. So we moved very far beyond the couplets of Blake, the quatrains of Shakespeare, into a very elaborately rhymed poem where I think the rhymes contribute a great deal to Keats's message. The meter of the poem, in this case, is the traditional meter of iambic pentameter. A pentameter line consists of 5 poetic feet, 10 syllables. And iamb is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. You'll find that Keats sustains that meter, the meter of iambic pentameter, throughout the course of the entire poem. The urn that Keats writes of was made in ancient Greece, 2,000 years before Keats wrote this ode. He probably saw the urn in the London Museum. Urns, of course, are rounded vases used for storing the ashes of the dead. And so it is Keats who sees this 2,000-year-old urn in the London Museum and decides to write an ode to this artifact, this cultural artifact. And what I'd like to do now is read the entire poem to you. So the poem begins on page number 14 and continues on to page number 15. And so please read along with me. Stanza number 1, bottom of page 14. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, Sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape of deities or mortals, or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loth? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Stanza number 2. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore ye soft pipes play on, not to the sensual ear, but, more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Stanza number 3. O happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, and happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new, more happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these Stanza 4 begins, who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadest thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or sea shore, mountain built, with peaceful citadel, is emptied of its folk this pious morn? And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return. Stanza number 5. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, doth tease us out of thought, as doth eternity. Cold pastoral, when old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in the midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. And so that is John Keats's ode, his personal ode on a Grecian urn, written in 1819. I want to take you through that poem, stanza by stanza, starting with stanza number 1. The first 2 lines introduce the main conceit of the poem. He says, thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time. So Keats here is addressing the Grecian urn itself. That's the thou in this poem, the you, the urn. So it's an example of what is called poetic apostrophe. Poetic apostrophe meaning a direct address either to an absent person or to a non-human entity. In the first line, we see another device that we've encountered in earlier poems, personification. Keats personifies the urn as a bride that's married to quietness, which is also personified. A poetic way of pointing out that the urn is literally silent. In line number 2, he calls it that foster child of silence and slow time. So he's pointing out here that the urn's maker is dead. The urn's maker has been dead for 2,000 years. And Keats imagines that in the centuries since his or her death, the death of the maker of this urn, the urn has been foster parented by silence and time. More personifications. It's not just time, it's slow time. Slow time because the urn is only slowly aging. It shows few signs of the years, the centuries that have passed. He continues in line number 3. Sylvan historian who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. Now he calls the urn a historian. It's a historian because the picture on its sides depicts a tale from the past. And it's a Sylvan historian because the tale that it depicts through that picture is a woodland scene. And that's what Sylvan means. It's another word for woodland, countryside. In lines 6 to 10, Keats asks, what leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape? What's the story that's depicted in the illustration on this urn? What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape of deities, of classical gods, or mortals, human beings, or of both in Tempe or the Dales of Arcady, both famously beautiful locations in ancient Greece? What men or gods are these? Keats asks. What maidens loth? Loth is another word meaning reluctant. What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? A timbrel is simply a tambourine. What wild ecstasy. So the references to maidens, mad pursuit, and the struggle to escape are all allusions, classical allusions to the many stories in Greek mythology where gods pursue beautiful mortal maidens. The final words of this stanza are wild ecstasy. I think we all know what ecstasy is. It's an overwhelming feeling of joy, of rapture. In this poem, the urn becomes for Keats a symbol of life, a symbol of life lived to the fullest. Ecstasy. Stanza number 2 begins, heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore ye soft pipes play on, not to the sensual ear, the physical ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. So we find out here that a piper is depicted on the urn, and the piper's melody, the song the piper is piping, is unheard. And so Keats has to imagine it. The piper plays to Keats's imagination, to his spirit. This ode is also a poem about the power of the imagination. And this is an idea that is developed in the stanzas that follow. Well, stanza 2 continues, fair youth beneath the tree, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. Yet do not grieve, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. She will be beautiful. So now he's moved from addressing the urn itself to addressing the fair youth who is depicted on the urn, the young man who is playing the pipe. And we learn here that he's playing the pipe in order to woo this beautiful woman, this fair maiden. Keats points out that the fair youth will never, ever kiss the maiden. He'll always be only so close to winning her love. Yet that also means that the woman, the maiden, will never grow old, she'll never lose her beauty. And the fair youth, the young man, the bold lover, will never stop loving her. They're timeless. And so here, at the end of stanza 2, Keats begins to develop still another key idea in this poem, permanence versus change. In stanza number 3, Keats turns to the natural scene depicted on the urn. The trees. He says, oh, happy, happy boughs. He's addressing the trees. He's apostrophizing the trees. Oh, happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, ever bid the spring goodbye. So it's always spring in the world of the urn, and winter never comes. At line number 23, he again addresses the fair youth, the piper. He says, happy melodist, in other words, the player of this melody, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young. So he uses repetition to brilliant effect in this stanza. He repeats the word happy 6 times, the word forever 4 times. The last 3 lines of stanza number 3 are so important because in those last 3 lines, Keats provides the contrast between the world of the urn, and in particular, love in the world of the urn, and love in the real world, the world in which we all live, the world in which Keats creates this work. Keats writes, all breathing human passion far above that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, sickened, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Parching means hot and dry. The key set of words in this last section of stanza number 3, far above. Another way of saying better than. Better than. The breathing human passion, as he calls it, the passion between the piper and the fair lady. is better than the passion that is experienced in the real world, in our world. In the real world, we regularly suffer from broken hearts and disillusionment. Things are rarely ever so happy, and nothing is forever. That's a key point that Keats is making in this ode. In stanza number 4, Keats examines the other figures on the urn. He writes, "Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadest thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed?" So the urn depicts not only the piper and his would-be girlfriend, not only the gods chasing the fair ladies, hoping to win their love. The urn depicts a group of people, including a priest who's leading a heifer, that is a female cow, a heifer that is wearing a garland, a wreath. And they're leading this heifer to an altar where the heifer will be sacrificed to their gods. So these are pagans before the time of Christianity, where religion, rituals often involved animal sacrifice. Well, in lines 35 to 40, we have Keats's greatest flight of fancy in this poem. He imagines, again, it's a poem about imagination. And here he imagines what's left out and thus only implied by the picture that's on the urn. He writes, again, thinking of these people who are depicted being led by their mysterious priest to the countryside to carry out this animal sacrifice for their gods. He says, "What little town by river or seashore or mountain built with peaceful citadel is emptied of its folk this pious morn?" Where did these people come from? What is their home? And then he thinks of that home and he addresses it in another apostrophe. "And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return." So the town, or the citadel, which is a fortified city, the town where the people on the urn live, he realizes, will be empty, will be desolate forever. It will be desolate forever because its inhabitants will always be on the countryside, getting prepared to carry out the sacrifice of the heifer to their mysterious gods. The priest, the people who follow him, the bold lover, his would-be lady, they are all frozen in time. Frozen in time in this painting that is found on the sides of this urn. Well, stanza number 9, my favorite stanza in this poem, once again apostrophizes the urn. He speaks to the urn as if the urn is a real person. He says, "O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought with forest branches and the trodden weed." So some difficult terms here that make more sense when we look at our notes. The urn has, he says, an Attic shape, and that's because it was made in Athens. And Attica is the province in Greece where Athens is located. Attitude, in this particular line, means the position of the figures in the painting on the urn. It's a technical term used to describe art. Likewise, breed, B-R-E-D-E. Breed refers to the woven patterns on the sides of the urn. Keats continues, "Thou, you, the urn, silent form, doth tease us out of thought as doth eternity." The urn does tease us out of thought. How so? Because attempting to conceive of something that old, this urn has been around for 2,000 years or more. Attempting to conceive of something that old staggers the mind. From the human perspective, it's as though the urn is eternal. He addresses the urn one more time in line 45. He calls it cold pastoral. It's cold because it's a physical object, cold to the touch. And it's pastoral because it depicts a scene of country life. Pastoral is another word for country life. Keats then concludes, and oh, how I love the conclusion of this poem. When old age shall this generation waste. In other words, when we're all dead, when this generation is passed on. When old age shall this generation waste, thou, you, the urn, shalt remain in the midst of other woe. Woe meaning suffering. In the midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. So there it is, among the most famous lines in all of poetry. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. According to Keats, that's the message of the urn. That's what the urn ultimately tells humankind. So how do we interpret this line? Beauty is truth, truth beauty. Well, perhaps he means that beauty is truth only in the world of the urn, this ideal place where its inhabitants are frozen in time, where it's always spring, where love is always at its height. Beauty is truth only in the world of the urn. After all, I've known, and I'm sure you've known, quite a few beautiful people who weren't particularly true. So it's only in the world of the urn that truth is beauty. That's one way to interpret this line. And of course, part of what makes poetry so fun and at times so frustrating is that there are multiple interpretations to particular lines, particular images, particular phrases. And I've always felt that perhaps the point of the final lines here in Keats's ode, the point of the lines is that art, whether a poem, a painting, a sculpture, art allows us to see that truth is beautiful. A beautiful work of art, that is an emotionally affecting work of art, can take you out of yourself, can show you the truth of other people, and make you feel empathy for those people. That's what art does at its best. That's what art does when it's created by writers like William Shakespeare, William Wordsworth, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, William Blake, John Keats, Emily Dickinson. I think another key idea that we can all identify with, which Keats describes over the course of this poem, is the thought that wouldn't it be great if the great times could last forever? But of course we know they don't. And Keats was keenly aware of that. Keats, who's lost his parents young, lost his mother to tuberculosis at a very young age. Keats, a medical student, diagnosed himself, and he realized that he had tuberculosis and that he would die young, which is tragically what happened. So Keats had a great awareness, even as a young man, of how the great things in life don't last, though we dearly wish they would. And he gives expression to all of that in this wonderful ode, Ode Upon a Grecian Urn. So we'll leave Keats, and when the lecture resumes in the next video, I'll look at, I think, an equally profound poet, and perhaps an even more original poet, and that is the 19th century American poet, Emily Dickinson.